Rays of the seed silver of my heart, come white for Tika, that's our thought. All very soft in their hands.
Yeah, I'm just looking. Is that now or is that some time ago? It's now. So, yeah, it's now.
Hey,
Thank you.
yeah, I can go Hello. You're busy. You've got sugar.
No,
Pardon?
Everything in that means.
Yes.
yes, it is. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
No,
You're right.
she said this next Friday. Yeah, no, I was thinking of being here, but Chrissy didn't go painting, so I was going to do Zoom down there, but she didn't come. No, I was going to speak down there. I was art today, but nobody came.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you just mentioned you could come. That's right, that's Friday. Yeah, because I've got 2 appointments and they should be quick. And then I'm picking up I'll order everything and I'll pick it up on my back. But if you can get some containers, great.
Yeah.
They may not take containers to put
Oh,
them in with
my
the
God.
COVID thing because they won't.
Oh, right,
guarantee. But that was the message about Friday.
You can go away for the break?
But the message was about Friday.
Yes, it was
Some people got it.
What's the point?
Actually, I was never into it. Well, there's some about it has been kind of inviting me to use it.
Yeah, right. Maybe it's time to
Yeah,
take
I
it
think
out.
that it's time to stop it.
Dodgy. Yes, yes, that's right. You and these vows, it's one you don't want to break.
Well, I wish that that would be my guiding. Yeah. Yeah, so it wasn't what I'm doing.
I'm heading down to Wanton with Annie and staying at that place. It's a beautiful house in
No, that's what we get.
Do you want me to share your stuff?
What's that?
Do you want?
To Wanton's north of Noosa. It's about a 45, 50 minutes. Yeah, it is stunning. It's just so pretty. Where Annie is.
It's hideous in the autumn.
Somewhere.
Yes, yeah, that's why I thought I should go down and spend hours and look at one of those.
Praise to Manjushri, right? Speaker is on, mic is on, all right.
Obeisance to my Guru and Protector Manjushri, hold that his heart is scriptural text symbolically seeing all things as they are, his understanding shines forth as his light, unclouded by the farmers or traces of ignorance and teaches his speech way to the patient love of Father for his only Son, all creatures caught in the prisons of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You, his dragon thunder, proclamation of the Dharma, arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma. Whose powerful sword of wisdom, whose down suffering, wherever for us of peace. Clearing away the darkness of all ignorance. I entreat you, O Manjushri, whose priestly body is formed with 112 marks of Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages achieving the highest perfection of Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning. O Manjushri, all loving one, with the brilliance of your wisdom, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind. Enlighten my intelligence and wisdom so that I may gain insight into Buddha's words and the text that explain them. Sashi Bodhi Jushin Le Trali Prabhi
Sangye Chodan Soki Chonamba Chanchu Padu Dani Kyasuchi Dani Chushin Kipesona Drola Penche Sangye Drupashu Sangye Chodan Soki Chonamba Chanchu Padu Dani Kyasuchi Dani Chushin Kipesona Drola Penche Sangye Drupashu Sangye Chodan Soki Chonamba Chanchu Padu Dani Kyasuchi Dani Chushin Kipesona Drola Penche Sangye Drupashu Kangi tuzi ni zone tawa tamje pambi chere tambi chunu dunzi kodam gela chanze. Good morning.
Good morning. So we'll offer the Thai offering, the offering is on X to do one, not just one. Cheers.
Cheers.
Matuda Anishirin Tara Sukun Engage and Sugi to this.
Yesterday, Madhu and Venerable Sherab were doing some Tibetan studies at the Tar Room. And Geshe was wondering, who's the teacher and who's the student? Sorry? Manjushri is the student.
선수 로봇 지원 일에 로봇 쇼에서 또 동반했으니까 오늘 잔도에 this depends on the yagulas.
If you need some help sometimes, Geshe can make the time. You know, if you want to study some Tibetan, Geshe is happy to help.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Open your calendar and make a date.
그냥 긴가라 모두 당당지 맹아지 라서 short mao kind kuminkan
So Paul, right?
Paul.
Yeah. You said that you're also going to give Geshe instruction about driving, right?
Yes, if you like. I'm not sure if Geshe was just learning for a new skill or an actual license, but I'm happy while I'm here, I can teach him everything he needs.
Yes, provided that he gets his learner's license first. Yeah, you just want to slide it in, do it legally.
I can try.
Yeah.
거기만 지금 일났어. 모든
I can show
젠더
you.
징이나 징이 일났어.
Were you like a race driver before? Or?
No, I know what the schools will be looking for, so I can show him what to do.
Okay.
I was a delivery driver.
Delivery driver.
Oh, driver.
Chalakoya.
Looking for rest.
그 당고야 대체비 냄당저래. 되게 있다야다. 제저 그지 인사를 상상을 lost.
Yeah, I guess I had a conversation with you, and you didn't get everything, but kind of you were speaking about, the different pedals, right? The brake and the clutch, and kind of the way that you need to look right and left. So Geshe thought that there's like some really special instructions coming its way.
I think I talk too fast.
Okay. Well, let's hope that you don't drive as fast as.
No.
오늘 안된도 소스 오늘 소스 됐어. 미소소스는 지금 도모만이 연대지. 아니 특별나 모두 당당 토는 나기시 되는 벳 그런 장치가 되지. 나 벳 차가지. 라 나좀 로종 나눠야지. 아니 소소 마사 순방 직송이라서 근전 됨부터 소소를 개발도 파취지. 균전 손이 마사스 마이나 아니 균전 때문에 차고지 손여레스 진짜 간지 토니나 근지 균전 삼진 소소 마사스 마이나 로종 오마트 차기도 왔으라.
Each one of us has our own unique qualities or fields of expertise, you might say. Geshe says that, although he's a Geshe, still there are other people that have better knowledge or better skills in other areas. So in the system of mind training, we are training in adopting a lower position, seeing ourselves as lower than others, and finding different perspectives on things that that we can do and things that others can do better than us. All right. Things that others can do better than us. So this is, if you take it to heart and train in that, you can always find things or ways in which you can adopt a humble position to see yourself as lower than others.
레도스라 수술을 민지자 고사다다 톱티즈디 안 텔템비트니 아니 갈게 계시 아니 밀이야 통종체대다 타도는 지 아니 지 카타 지 가서 카타 교환을 써봐. 인질의 배 통송지에디 응원주기 가서 지 공시 수저로서 그래서 배 아니 전중 양면 지에지야 가시야 조직 차도 왔어.
So adopting a lower position, a humble position. One of the negative traits that we have is pride. We might be looking for a good name for ourselves, to make a good name for ourselves, or to have a high position. And through that, we look down on others. We badmouth others. We speak badly of others. We get involved in different negative activities on that account. The subject matter of Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva of Life is dealing with ways of putting a stop to all those attitudes.
dinza sani 좀 된 얘기가 지다 아니 나다나데 kansa 추송데 kansa 추무송데 냠벌 교다리스 디송요로스 디치디게 지당게 nenjo바세 기우탕바세 디 넘버 컨트직 토니 아니 만주 듄이야 레위오 자원이니 참마 도바치 인자 아니 만주 원이 지 가답 컨트직 통바이냐 소소리 야가지 따마토나야 만주 지교도 지금 주시샤치니 로고에 뜻 마시오 키치모 산직 송나 더 키치슈 직차고레스라
One of the statements taken from scripture, and this is in line with Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva way of life, that we cannot have the right measure, the correct measure of another person. And since we cannot have the right measure of another person, when we attempt to do that, there is a danger that we will decline. It works better in, I guess it works better in Tibetan language. I guess if we try to if I try to translate it in a more loose sense, it's more like we cannot really be critical of another person, because being critical of another person while not being able to really assess who they are will bring about our own decline, our own deterioration. So then, since we cannot really have a right measure, correct assessment of the person that is in front of us, they cannot appear to our mind exactly in the way that they are. If we become critical of that person, it's going to be a negative attitude. So even if we cannot adopt a humble position in seeing ourselves as lower than others, at least we should cultivate the recognition of the equality between oneself and others. This is of the most important points within the Buddhist tradition.
제 지점에라 레바기 디 직송요라스 멜레탄딘 직데뇨 보통 직데탄딘 멜라뇨 보통스 원의 단에 딘지죠 다스라 나주도 때오지 직 소수기 들럼 좀 직 냠버스로지 통대에서 대형말이야 먼저지 망치야디 신득 망라야 셴비통 신든 한기 자와야 샤 차치니 아니 직된 콘 된님 로딩 카드야 아니 신든 한기 된다라야 직 상도상에 매봐 또 신 아니 참뭐 그지야 아니 잠만다 용초월에서 용초원은 sabzar치고야지 간지 수수 셈는이야 순대지 통나야 이게 통종 마셔 이때 마시고 계시물 했었어.
You find this point also in the life story of Milarepa, the great Tibetan yogi. In one of the events in the life story of Milarepa, he said that when worldly people see him, they think that he's crazy. He's crazy in the eyes of the world. But when he looks at worldly people, he also finds them crazy. So in a sense that when we go about and engage in our worldly affairs, in being mostly busy or concerned with the affairs of this lifetime, we behave like crazy people. We become insane when we are so focused on worldly affairs, things that belong to this lifetime only. Whereas when we then go about and venture out to other places, when we go for a hike to the mountains or what have you, and we come across someone that is not focused on these worldly affairs, we can see all sorts of stuff that would normally not conform to the way that we normally think of day-to-day affairs. So it's really important to not fall prey to an attitude that belittles others, that looks down on others. We cannot have the right assessment or the correct measure of people that we encounter. So it is really important, as much as we can, that we refrain from developing an attitude that belittles others, other living beings or other people. Anyway, Geshe thought of mentioning that point for the sake of our tea break. Anyway, having said that, let's go back to the text. We've been looking at the 4th chapter of Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life. Today we're going to pick up from verse 19. So just looking at where we have started a section of cultivating conscientiousness with regards to the training, and we are covering the first main point in that section, which consists of 5 branches. Yesterday we started the 4th branch, which comes under the heading of there is no opportunity to practice virtue if one has taken rebirth in the lower realms. And today we're going to pick up from the 3rd point in that section, which is it is extremely difficult to be liberated from the lower realms once one has taken rebirth there. Let's look at this verse. It's here. One did not generate virtue, and one accumulated negativity easily. Even for 10 million eons, one will not hear even the words happy realm. So then when we look at this verse, it says, even for 10 million eons, one will not hear even the words happy realm. Well, if one is liberated from the lower realms, it means that one will take a rebirth in a happy realm, a pleasant state of existence. In order for that to occur, you need certain causes and conditions. It's not that such a rebirth is independent from causes and conditions. Such a rebirth depends upon causes and conditions. And the causes and conditions that lead to a pleasant rebirth is those causes and conditions are virtue, only virtue. It is totally impossible for non-virtues, for negativities to be causes for taking a pleasant or pleasurable rebirth. That being the case, then we need to look at our mind, to examine our mind and see where we're going with that. It's not that we can judge where we're going just depending on our clothes or robes or what have you. It depends upon our state of mind. So look at our mind. We can look at our mind and have a right assessment. Are we predominantly controlled by negative states, or have we already cultivated ample virtue?
Tinza kamkola ngazu pe ani nyanga tsaw ngazu gewa chigi yu khul chewa nya semya ani ngarje ta chigden chegel ta chawdo ta jensim ko ni lanche ani pigi luda ngaki choba khari yang do tyambai ani digba mato gewa la tray yo marwas ra tinza gewa chigi khul chinaya digba la tray nyanga pe chimbo chig chagdo asman zola.
It's important to investigate that, because it might be that we are pretending as if we are cultivating virtue, and yet inside, in our mind, we're still governed by pride or influenced by the 8 worldly concerns, by jealousy, competitiveness, and so forth. And if these are the states that control our mind, then there would be no virtue, would be only negativity. So it's really important that we investigate our mind, because externally, there might be a certain show that we're putting. There might be a certain appearance that we're putting, but it doesn't really mean that if we act in a certain way that is seen physically, that a state of mind accords with that.
Chadang gold yak chet tangan tu chik lunga nam yu de de thya ani megi wi chol shor bai na an pe ma se ten ta tabshi me yu ro chik tab kyu shu cha ro da tin za man sam lo ya bu ta ma shi bai na man khar che bai na ani dik ba ma to ge wa lai mun ri nyang ga pe chim yo an za ta sam lo ti pe ma se ba te ni sam lo tang dan ti nenga cha go res ro.
Well, we act with our body and speech under the influence of anger, attachment, or ignorance. Needless to say that what we do is negative. So if our body, speech, and mind are all working in a negative way, cultivating negativity, is such a great pity. When that occurs, we find ourselves in dangerous water, in a dangerous situation. So it is so vital that we investigate what we do and make sure that we do not submit our body, speech, and mind to those negative states. So suppose that we have already been born in a pleasurable state of existence, and rather than cultivating virtue, we cultivate negative actions that lead us to a miserable rebirth in the next lifetime. It is said that being liberated from a miserable rebirth, and again, being liberated from that, being born in a happy state of existence, is so hard, because if we already find ourselves in a miserable state of existence, how hard or impossible it becomes to cultivate positive actions, virtuous actions that will bring liberation from that state. So therefore, when this verse says, even for 10 million eons, one will not hear even the words happy realm, we really need to take it into consideration. Not just say the words, but to see that as a reality, as something that is real. And use the opportunity that we have now and not put it to waste. We have the ability to use whatever we can in order to do that. So it's important to identify correctly our situation. We have the ability to prevent such state from occurring. In the commentary, it says it is extremely difficult to later attain a precious human rebirth because in this life one has not generated any virtue and accumulated negativity easily. And so one will not even hear the words happy round for 10 million eons.
And Tawajed and George and Sami and Luden Telekan Kawach race.
Let's look at the next point in this section, which is coming under point E. The reason is it is difficult to obtain the leisure and endowments. Now, if finding just a mere human rebirth is hard, even more so, we can think of how difficult it is to find a human rebirth with freedoms and opportunities. Verse 20 reads, "For that very reason, the Bhagavan taught that merely becoming human is extremely difficult, as it is for a turtle to put its neck through the yoke of floating on the great ocean."
Better turn judging Kazushel Namashena and so the me within Leia and it didn't Kalakawachi, but the same thing Ichi Yobina and Suzumulu Lami Kalaya me within the and it Temechusus Mandroyagi and Tablayata between Chitugaras.
The most important thing to develop in relation to this verse is trust in the difficulty of finding freedoms and opportunities. So we have here analogies that might help us to understand the difficulty in obtaining such a rebirth. And you might grapple with joining the analogy together with the meaning, combining these two. And irrespective of how well you can do it, the most important thing to do is to have that deep felt appreciation of the difficulty in obtaining freedoms and opportunities. Because if you do appreciate how hard it is to obtain freedoms and opportunities, you will make sure that you do whatever you can in order to make the most out of this opportunity. You will make effort. You will use methods for not wasting the opportunity that you have now and making the most out of it.
Sen Ganzu Chimbu, Nyashinki, Rubber Temple Chubati, Niba Hava Yinam, Jomdendiki, the Malaso, Jomdendiki Katsa, Gamonta, Tessin to Minishin, Toka Yino, Shesumba, Gava Magician, the Wasama, Dendru Giant Mutepa, Teni Channel Jomdendiki Ganzu, Chayante, Ganzu Chimbu, Par in to Parin Twin Chebi, Nyashin Pogachi. Boga chikpa shik yobi nyashingi boga lot ya yan debano into lenri chung river yin jamba shukawatar devi kya mini shindu tokawa sombi tanju tobi tuzu gawa la bebar chawo.
The commentary reads, because it is very difficult to find a happy rebirth from the lower realms. The Bhagavan taught in his perfect scriptures, Bhikshus, let all this ground become a great ocean on which a yoke with one hole is moved by the wind. In that ocean is a blind turtle that only sticks its neck out of the water once 100 years. Bhikkhus, what do you think? Is it easy for a turtle to catch the yoke with its neck? Tathagata, it is not. The Tathagata replied, Bhikkhus, similarly, it is difficult merely to attain a human rebirth. If one does not create virtue and accumulates non-virtue, then one does not even hear the word happy migration. For that reason, the Bhagavan taught that merely to attain a human rebirth is much more difficult than for a blind turtle that comes up only every 100 years to catch the yoke floating on the surface of the ocean, being moved here and there by the wind. Therefore, one needs to make an effort to practice virtue when one is in the happy migration.
Tadi ngoni ros ra tenanga zambling chunjun tikang ya socha ki thangka sheba no thame ros ra socha thame ros ine dinalo ya mi kombinen chudanji modo mewas chuta kashi modo mewas.
It is true, isn't it? When you think of the number of living beings on this planet, they are beyond count. And human beings are just a few billions out of these countless living beings.
Tindi songtang bai na ani mi kyo lembati ani kalekhawo ti nani kyang ani chi chusul dindi jeda ya jawi kawayo ba tele kyang be muntra khashi mo yomar wasra.
So thinking of that comparatively, you can appreciate how hard it is to be born as a human being. And even more so when then you think of those human beings that have those opportunities or avenues to encounter the Dharma and so forth. So few, isn't it? Maybe a few 100,000 and that's it.
Teni dang woni che namda chechine mizi koran ya ani che ki mizi ke tungi
and then those that spend the life in fully utilizing this opportunity, making the most out of it, are even fewer than that. Maybe just a few thousands.
And the trolls mason chego Samsung song you go thus.
That being the case, then we can really appreciate the good fortune that we have at the moment. If you think about it and you come to see how rare it is to find such an opportunity, then you first of all become appreciative, thinking that I'm so lucky, I'm so fortunate. And it also makes you determined to make the most out of it. It's good to think about it, don't you think?
One should number chading into Zogi Jigdale Drum Meshivada, Drum Munivada, and it did never never did Tonic and the church and Desha was all in Maros. Namju only Tani, Namju Yogi Sogi, and Chenny, Shuyaji Redos, indeed song down and Namzu just Juk to Yadia and shows you cows on to us.
And when you think about it, it's not this type of worldly traditions in which it cannot be practiced or you don't need a particular ability or potential to practice. It's actually particularly potent for those that are smart. Those that are smart or intelligent can can make so much more out of this tradition. So this is something that we can do. This is a tradition that we can follow.
일단 이번에 denro 토비체 만벨나 난로 랑돌라 모반기원은 가르 그때 원으로 팀하세요.
Gyawa Gombala. Bhakcha.
어때라니 쇼쇼스. 게와 곰발라 박차와스. 딱 게와 곰발이야. 박차와 니바 게와 곰발이야. 딱지 박차와스라는 게와 곰바치와티 안 나메스 마쇼와. 투셔스 만로와. 베디 에니 센디 제투야야. 아니 경고리스 송고라다.
So we've covered the first point, which is being conscientious about abandoning wrongdoings. Let's look at the second point, which is being conscientious about cultivating virtue, keeping in mind that now we're looking at how we become conscientious with respect to the training. So being conscientious about cultivating virtue is essential. It is important that we do not disregard virtue, that we do not play down the importance of virtue.
Gewa gombala pachawala sun harsabi tigal thaibi tepongala bebari bata ngandro donga nenchi nyo samji teseni ngandro le mesibi ginsendans tena dibi nimbola bebari bi ginsendo tambong harsabi tigal thaibi tepongala bebari bani kechi chichi dibi kya kawanami nenjuna thomen khowa satiki dendro mundu pechugus.
First off, let's look at the outline. So, verse 21 comes under the heading of, as negativity is accumulated in the past are limitless, it would be reasonable to make effort in abandoning them. Then, the next verse comes under the heading of karma that leads one to take rebirth in the lower realms is not exhausted by merely experiencing suffering in the lower realms. And then the reasons why it would be reasonable to make effort in applying the antidotes to negativity. Let's begin with verse 21. So it says, if one remains in the naraks for eons due to one moment of negativity, then why even mention that one won't go to the happy realms due to the negativity accumulated in beginningless samsara?
Terta jevenong direta chanchu sembala kontro tawo ke chik chibi digbekya kawan namar nevan gyonas thoma me cover sabi digba nimbe machamba rangile yebi diki dendro mondro page gobi tob ji gon digba jon beber chawos.
Let's look for a second at the FPMT translation, which is slightly clearer. So, if even by the negativity committed for an instant one will abide in the relentless torment for eons, that's one of the hells, then because of the negativities that have accumulated in beginningless cyclic existence, what need to mention might not going to a good migration. So then the commentary says, if one has to remain in the hells without respite due to only one moment of anger at a bodhisattva, then what need is there to mention that one will not go to a happy migrations due to the negativity in one's continuum that has been accumulated since beginningless time and has not been destroyed by an antidote? One should train in purifying negativity by way of the four powers.
And even Nandro don't have lynching on something. They said, Nandro message gives don't have lynching on something, chance of Zotu and Digger the Tetson without in the same money. Message gives them carries down. Digby Nichib in Jerusalem, Dendro Kiwi, Nandro the Taro Muko Shinas, 대전 코는 용견이 되는 남들 민교들 되는 용신도 대화신가 case.
We've previously spoken about the purification of negativities using the application of the 4 powers of the antidote, right? So this is what this section says, that such negativities need to be purified by the 4 powers. Now let's move on to the next point. It says, that karma that leads one to take rebirth in the lower realms is not exhausted by merely experiencing suffering in the lower realms. All right. You might be thinking, Geshe said that you might be thinking that even if I experience that suffering, the negativity that has created that suffering will thereby be exhausted. So it's not such a bad thing, it's all right. So verse 22 says too that only through the mere experience one will not be liberated, because during the experience one generates other negativities.
Legin Jebu Tetson Kona Yon Guni, Tetson Chixibi, Kansat in the number tower Minguti, the Delfungi Legin Jebu Tungatin, Yon Shindu, Dunga Tobjin Kibi, Digwa Shenda, Church La Rav Geshe, so we chatties. Nandru Dana Geo Tu Chonsi, Digwa Gut, so we Nandru Gun Gobala, Jumper Chow.
The commentary to that begins with a certain question. One may think it is not difficult to become liberated from the lower realms because after the result is exhausted, I will take rebirth and the happy migrations. So to that, Shantideva says, only through the mere experience one will not be liberated, because during the experience one generates other negativities. So continuing with the commentary, it says a person will not be liberated from the lower realms because merely through experiencing the result of only one negative actions. While one is experiencing the suffering result of previous karma, one adventitiously creates other negativity that brings forth powerful suffering. On the basis of the lower realms, virtue is weak and negativity is continuously accumulated. Therefore, one should strive to stop the cause of the lower realms.
There's the Hongi and a dig big leg, Nami Yonshin, that dig was Sagayavada, the that in the Kasota, the Gajajara, the Nami Trotiguras. Timasi Nazupi, Chu Chigins, La Villa Villa, Chu Shigilaya, Dipa Kazusagos, Chu Nigilaya, Dipa Kasa, Kazanazu Sempedi, Chadanglia, Conchitan. Kadu in a bit, any Chaldang be any Sanka Javchin Manzulia, want to Kujuba Rogeredos, Dinza, any church Hijilaya, Diva Sagayana, Digby Nami Nyonshin, Diva Sayada, Yimbados Redos.
While negative actions are ripening, we still accumulate new negative actions. We know that based upon a personal experience, when we look at what occurs to us when negativity is ripened in suffering, we continue while that happens to accumulate negative actions, let alone doing that while we're already experiencing fruition, even when we practice the Dhamma, or even while we listen to teachings, we still perform negative actions, don't we? When we look at a personal experience, we can recognize that even that occurs to us. We have been so habituated with anger, attachment, and so forth that it seems that they rush up and completely clog our minds so that we end up continuously still behaving in a negative way. When we look at our habitual tendencies, we can recognize that.
Sumba Digbi Nimbula Beba, Ribi Gunzana She. That Divi Nimbolaya, Beba Dilea, Gunzayoris, very rigorous, right?
So then the next point says the reason why it would be reasonable to make effort in applying the antidotes to negativity. So applying antidotes is not just a random thing that we do. It is reasonable to do it.
When I'm gunzen to go by now, digby the debut dunhar was. Not to dunhar dug me right?
So let's formulate a logical reason for applying antidotes. What would be the logical reason? Well, negativities result in suffering, and we do not wish for suffering. That is the reason.
Rather, dunga dungi jina diva sakores. Dunga mending jina diva pangores. The dinner was red was ra.
If you want suffering, you should accumulate negativities. If you do not want suffering, you should abstain from negativities.
Madire, gunzen la shees, tanjur tomni, gewala mambelna, rangi rang cover gewatans, susun gogor town chatores. Send the dunga nyongo batan, chimang nadi dunga ki don gewatan. Tena digo ponshi gewala bebari, gunzenos.
There are 4 points in the explanation of the reasons why it would be reasonable to make effort in applying the antidotes to negativities. The first is one deceives oneself, right? It is self-deception if one does not make effort in virtue once one has obtained leisures and endowments. Next is one will experience suffering in this life. The third point is one will be tormented with the suffering of the lower realms in the future. And finally, why it would be reasonable to abandon negativities and make effort in virtue.
Teni ta dunga nimbo la ya bevore sondi dunga nimbo kharre selos yograda raman kasse usse bana dunga nimbo kharre slavana patient dos love chores dunga gi ganta di and devaras devi judi geva insa geva di dunga nimbo res lana love chores ra.
So as we're looking at why the reasons why it would be reasonable to make effort in applying the antidotes to negativity, well, let's think of antidotes. What is the antidote to suffering? Well, the opposite of suffering is happiness. And the cause for happiness is virtue. And therefore, the antidote to suffering is virtue.
Dunga jomshit di dunga su jom to Grislavana, Karik jom to Grislavana, Dunga jomge delaya, Geva Bashi Mato Yomares. It's a Geva di Dunga jomshiki, Nimbo Dres. The Dunga ki Nimbo Tartubat Karislama, and Dunga Kitsawa the Danzi, the Danzi Nimbo, Damet of Vishereza, Sawa Tartubat Damet of Visheres, two Slano.
So let's find ways of thinking about it. So what is the thing that destroys suffering? What is the antidote to suffering? It is only virtue. Virtue is an antidote to suffering. What is the final antidote to suffering? The final antidote is wisdom that realizes selflessness. It's good to think about it like that.
Is it that Dungar Tsawa ni never sondu you niji by na? Dungar Tsawa dance Mari wa Munzen Chichi. Ti Nibo Damet of Sheriff di Gongo Wores.
So if you wish for no suffering whatsoever, you need to deal with the fundamental root of suffering. The fundamental root of suffering is ignorance of grasping at the self. And what antidotes ignorance of grasping at the self is wisdom that realizes selflessness.
nganzu sheramni mutadda bae tiriya sangi 탐지 sheru yipardo chimba ngombo zo sangi sus yasra
Towards the end of the Heart Sutra, it is said that all the Buddhas of the 3 times have attained complete and perfect enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom.
nganzu sheramni munde goden su di 아니 당진기 님보 탈투거디 아니 셔럽 다음에 또 셔럽이 버디 고마토나 아니 셔럽님은 덴비 고든디 두고요 말았어.
If the final antidote to grasping at the self is wisdom that realizes selflessness, if you don't understand what wisdom that realizes selflessness is, you're not really fulfilling the purpose of the Heart Sutra.
그래 타와드 탐지 김비기 공반디 아니 셔럽이 파르드 춤바 딩여를 때는 토고그리스 아니 게토면은 손데 다라베도스라
As it is stated in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra in 8,000 verses, the attainment of liberation or omniscience depends on the perfection of wisdom.
이제 게톰비기 조자디 게톰비기 조자디 신등이지기 실험님보다요 시바이나 레라우지 토네 아니 또트야지 그럼 만 시그마 비슈지 근데 게톰바도 이마지가 컨텐된 거는 사용 말았다 그럼 로 상부 슈지면은 사용 말았다 그 실험님보디 이마지가야 살동다 지금 되는 거 좋네요 된투그라스라
If you wish to know the subject matter of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra in 8,000 verses, you can easily realize that through the Heart Sutra. So think about doing a recitation, for example, of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra in 8,000 verses. It's hard to complete in one day, even if you're a good reader, in a sense that your way of enunciating the words is clear and fast. It's hard to finish it in one day. But with the Heart Sutra, you can do thousands of recitations every day and get to the meaning of that as well.
딘다 니마지가야 살동다 지금 된 투에 디 살치에 맞는 샤샤와나 아니 다 소수노트레도 아스라
If 1,000 recitation of the Heart Sutra can be done in a single day, then if you don't do even one, well, you're the one who is standing to lose something, right? It's your problem. It's not anyone else's problem.
테레다 당분이스 단주 톰니 게와 라 맘베나 랑기 랑도 원교니 덴디 타와니 교니 다기 게고 마치나 델레베 셰메디 델레모보 셰메도스.
Let's begin with the first point in that section that explains why it is appropriate to strive in the antidote to negativity. We said that the first point is if one does not strive in virtue upon having attained a happy migration, then one deceives oneself. If upon having found this freedom, I do not meditate on virtue, there is no greater deception, there is no greater ignorance.
레다 콘두시와 나시레 아니 산지기 추기니 디 셔르니 비노노야 숭고도스라 그 딘디디 수수기 된 투야지기 투즈데라야 마데니 샤바이나 그 딜리지 가서다 디 가서 소소수 농주제 마도 소소수 마체바제 마도 마투바다 마누가 딘지 싸우니 내면다스 마투바다 마누가 마이바지 투바다 네바 딘지 마체나 안디 디타 수이케레스라.
The essence of the Buddha Dharma is contained in the perfection of wisdoms in the Heart Sutra. So if we do not make the time to go over the Heart Sutra, then this is our own fault. It is not impossible to do it. It is not that we're incapable of doing that. Neglecting to do that is totally our fault, in our code.
인자다 지 투버당 니비까미야 안 마체바이나 아니 게와 마체바이나 다 소소소기 소소소 아니 고고땅한테 찡부찌기하는스 다 딜을 타가지 아니 고고를 수야지 요마라스 안준 남규지 미싱 고고땅송세 소바 직자라테스리 배차춘부리 아니 펜수 롱치온디 따지 고고를 수소스 쉬우지베 아니 탑규츠데 텔레페 아니 양규 동규마고 탑규와 차가도 왔어 깨와니 깨와 규치니 나소 문담에 발이야 송조야기 규디 수수치기도 왔어
If we do not act virtuously, and we can act in that way, right? So we are capable of doing that. We can do that. And yet we choose not to act virtuously. It is exactly the self-deception that Shantideva refers to here. So sometimes we might speak of someone else tricking us or deceiving us. It might be about money or possession or otherwise some other issue. So we blame someone else for some tricks or deception. But when we think of this self-deception that is referred to here by the text, it is thousandfold more serious than other people deceiving us, because through that self-deception, we end up in going through miserable states of existence without end, without depth, without breadth. The commentary to verse 23 says, having found it difficult to find freedom with great meaning, if I do not strive in and meditate on the cause for high status and liberation, then there is no better method of self-deception. There is also no greater ignorance than the ignorance concerning what has to be practiced and what has to be abandoned. And then the next verse, number 24, comes at the heading of one will experience suffering in this life. So, it says, should I, after having understood this, still be indolent due to ignorance? When the time to die comes, great misery will arise.
Chicago's. Tele Tanda Zomba Chimbu Bonita and Digo Giva Triboli and Bevachino and Chigaramoli and Gaba maybe Tony and Sepetuna, Yachimon Denver Kiodi, Jaja Saris. Verse 24 says, should I, after having realized that I have to strive in achieving virtue and abandoning negativity, still be indolent in a sense that we procrastinate. We think that I will do it later. I can still do it later. So if we still
if we're still being indolent with regard to the mind of enlightenment, the practice of the perfections and so on, then at the time of death, when I know I'm going to the lower realms, great misery will arise. So if we procrastinate and do nothing, and all of a sudden the death process kicks in, and we know that soon we will die, the only thing that we will do at that point will lament and cry out, alas, I did not practice when I should have practiced. But if you then cultivate virtue throughout your life, and coming to the death process, approaching the time of death, you know that you have practiced virtue and you can call upon that virtue. You can through that also generate the confidence that you will proceed to the happy realms, to the happy migrations. And therefore it says, I should strive with great effort.
Sumba chima ngandru dunga ki donga yuwanes. Nyami soga yurindu dakilu sekirna. Gyoba mese membari semdun gyoba temisas.
Next verse comes under the heading of, later one will be beaten down by the suffering of the lower realms. When my body is burned by the difficult to bear fires of hell for a long time, the fire of terrible regret will light up, and the mind will be despondent. This is certain.
Chanjuki sem nyamba soji. Nyebe nyawa kela. Nyawe musu kawe yurindu dakilu sebanjuna. Gyoba mesebi membari rangi sem donjo. Temusawe nyedongi magobala beber chawos.
Then we have here an advice, a practice of the mind of enlightenment. Through the faults of degenerating the mind of enlightenment and so forth, one will take rebirth in the lower realms. When the difficult to bear fires of hell burn my body for a long time, the fire of terrible regret will light up and my mind will become despondent. Since this is certain, make an effort not to incur any faults and downfalls.
Jeba tena degbo ponshi gewa la bebari bi gyunzela ni tanjul chus seni flaya nyewa trina sem meba dun sombata mumbi gyu samri gogo tambo tanjul chus seni flaya nyewa trina sem meba dun sombani shendu nyega pembisa Chishikta ni kyuni dani shedan denshindu chiya nyewa tetrina hagi mombo chabashi dalan dese meduses.
The last point in this section is why it would be reasonable to abandon negativities and make effort in virtue. There are 2 points in that section. The first is to be led again to the hell realms after having wasted a human life of leisure and opportunity would be utter stupidity. The second is, it is reasonable to think of such behavior as the cause of delusion. Let's begin with the first point. To be led again to the hell realms after having wasted a human life of leisure and opportunity would be utter stupidity, and there are 1.5 verses included in this section. So the following 6 lines read, having found somehow this extremely difficult to find basis of benefit, if I return to the lower realms later again, despite having knowledge, then similarly to one confused by mantra, this makes me someone without mind.
That's all the pendant dream 타바드 탐진기 미살이야 드르니비 땡 초트교 딘디치 만zul에 니와디 간다직 토는 니와리스 상우지 땅와는 자원이니직 아니 로이로 마쇼지 원의 단에게 다지 더블 레버 쇼지기 원기 아니 니와 딘디치 여바디 아니 소수 시신도 아니 딘지 땡 티토네 하리야 가서 대한 지로고서 타바드 탐진기 미살이야 bezo ma cheba nyewala ma thin grabai na ta di le mo ba chita tele tap kyo chi ta khariores ro.
So think about it. We have now this working basis for attaining benefit and happiness for the sake of others. We have this basis, working basis for attaining the state of liberation and the state of omniscience. So how did we gain such basis? It is inconceivable. And yet it must have come through an exceptional method. But if we ignore that, not make effort, and we are once again led to a miserable rebirth, that would be an utterly mindless thing to do, utterly ignorant thing to do.
Re tanjushin de ni ka sin ni na tön chewe pembi sande chishiktar temon gi ni ban gyone dami penne shibigi sherab da denshin chi yewe ne de tina jinha gi mo ba chela shin dala di number di semme sebo nyam samba chawos.
The commentary to this section says, this basis of benefit, the precious human rebirth with freedoms and endowments, is extremely difficult to find, and if found, is of great purpose. Having found it somehow, should I again go to the lower realms despite having knowledge of what is useful and what is harmful, then that makes me someone without a mind, achieving just the purpose of the moment for self, similarly to a person confused by mantra.
Ta mumbi gyu samrikwanes chi mumba cheshinas nanzu dibdi chi mumbe yati ngoni chi niba yoba niba ten tuyagi niba yebi ten dibdi chi niba kalaya tanda ina chi ani ten di chuzus maso be matuya ani mumba dibdi chi tonta karche bari samsungta momba khari mombi ton chiyoba yobi and momba dishingoris chishi momba cheshena chime dagya mashiti dag kon chishiyas.
So that, just a note on the translation, to be confused by mantra is kind of the Tibetan way of saying that someone has cast a spell on you and rendered you confused or incapable of thinking, like you're being mindless under the spell of a particular thing. So anyway, looking at the next section, it is appropriate to contemplate the cause of ignorance. It is so neglecting to make the most out of freedoms and opportunities is occurring due to confusion, due to ignorance. And as it says here, it is appropriate to contemplate the cause of ignorance. I do not know how I got so confused. What is lurking inside me?
Gyuchi monin fiba dag kya mashite dag khona mombi gyuchi shi yodi yo nisu nyamdu lele on kunaya tedar samba chawas.
The commentary to this section says, how did one become confused? To that, this two line says, I do not know how I got so confused. What is lurking inside of me? I also do not know due to which cause I got confused and thus deceived. What cause for confusion is lurking inside me? Think there definitely is something. If one falls into laziness, then one should think in this way.
Tedandu steondita nganzu gi samutang du noriyobachi. And then shingo was the nganzu sosu konalia chiyutilia samumadanji. If
we really think about what's lurking inside, Geshe reckons that we'll come to see it, we'll come to understand it. We often don't really look inside. We're not really trying to find out what's lurking inside of us. We're externally oriented. We're looking at what other people do or what other people say, So we pay attention to the external, but hardly do we pay attention to what's happening inside.
그래서 소수 콜에 지 마시나 미생 콜에 지 텔리겐 싱마로스 딘자 안 뒤수 초가
If you do not know what's happening to you inside, needless to say that you will not be able to understand what's happening outside with other people. And if you still attempt to do that, that's such a waste of time.
숨분 유문 봉월라 박 자월라 숨 유문비 예믹 삼바타 유문 봉비 까찔라 교 메리바타 베베 파나 폰네버 니드 조금보스.
Let's look at the next section in guarding conscientiousness with respect to the training. So being conscientious about abandoning the afflictions is the third point in being conscientious with regards to the training. And there are 3 points in that section. The first is reflecting on the disadvantages of the afflictions. Then it is inappropriate to feel weary of the hardships involved in abandoning the afflictions. And finally, cultivating joy that it is possible to abandon the afflictions if effort is made.
당분 유문비 예믹 삼발라 숨 유문기 란라 네버치비 술 삼바타 유문라 소보고 머리바타 대 숑비 체드 로이 톱게보스.
Looking at the first point, reflecting on the disadvantages of the afflictions, again, we have 3 points. Reflecting on the way the afflictions act to harm oneself. To cultivate patience towards the afflictions is unreasonable, and developing strength of mind in order to destroy them.
대단도주 내가 치시 디차고라서라 아니 뉴무기 랑 네버치비 술 삼마투나 아니 뉴무기한 통통 말했어. 뉴무기한 마투나 뉴무밤비 체드 님보kombalaya 베바 텔리기한 용고 말아왔어.
Just looking at the outline, you can see the importance of these points. If you do not reflect on the way the afflictions act to harm you, you'll not be able to stop them. If you do not make effort in the application of antidotes to the afflictions, they will not be arrested.
자, 담보지 뉴무기 랑 네버치 두 문두 돌아야. 따지 치고다스. 라 뉴무기 소소를 내면 먼저 뉴무 방거에 말았어. 라.
So first off, the first step is to ask yourself, are my afflictions harmful? Are they harmful to me? If we don't see that they are harmful to us, that they're harming, if I don't see that they harm me, I will not be able to put a stop to them.
그래서 내가 지금 여바디 세우세양 가르랬으나 먼저 대화를 문제에 두마. 먼저 문제를 두마 토도 봐봤던 대화디 만주야 진행기 아니 테벨 소디 랑기 뉴무디 임바디 야채 야다마 임바디 먼저 임바 고마트나 아니 뉴무디 견 따투 말했어.
So this is a really vital point, that we need to recognize how afflictions are detrimental to us. We want to be happy and we do not want to experience suffering, and yet we do happen to experience suffering. All of a sudden we experience suffering and the happiness that we seek does not come to pass. So why does it happen? It happens definitely 100% guaranteed that it is happening because of the afflictions. So if we're incapable of seeing that the afflictions are responsible for not getting what I want, not getting the happiness that I want, and still continuing to experience the suffering that I do not seek, if we do not see that point, we will not be able to put a stop to that. We'll not be able to get what we want. Shall we leave it here for now? Put the prayers on the screen. Gewadi Nyududa Lama Sange Dukine Doa Chikyama Lupa De Sava Gopashu Rinpoche Make Pama Kegyuchi Kepanyampa Mepaya Kone Gondo Pawashu Kowe Shinkandi Pendam Dewa Malu Chue Chere Siwan Tenzin Gyatso Shape Site Badu Tengu Sanju Chupelam Sheshe Sante Content Shana Pemo Tenzin Gyatso Soa Devso Shendu Jangun Yawe Tenzin Topelwe Ozo Dopozi Chosun Kowe Le Montuju Pada Soduji Kondu Shapten Shu.
Thank you. Vachalam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Geshe.
Thank you, Geshe. Thank you,
Good job,
Venerable
Thank you.
Patson. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Geshe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Geshe.
Thanks, Venerable Karsten.
Thank
Thank you, Geshe.
Hi, Reverend Retro.
Hello, hello.
How are you? How are you?
Good, good.
I say hello.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi,
Hello.
you too.
We're good.
Yes, we're okay. You're okay too, are you? You look well.
Thank you, Geshe.
I'm tested, but I'm okay. I've just got a cold.
Yes. Oh, I just have a cold. Oh, okay. Take care.
I will, and you too. Having these I've got more time to take the teachings, which is good.
Richards. I'm Saturday, Sunday, Monday evening, free time.
Yeah.
September.
There's something in this Krishna's Saturday. It's the 25th March. Yeah, so it's just like 5 minutes. Sorry, Saturday. Sono uomini nella 나라는데 Geshe Tsultrim 랭에 컬러 나페시티 콘센트로 코드
Was it too strong? No. I thought it
그 세 번째는
yes, it did not. It was too
무슨
strong.
소리죠?
So, I don't know. Oh, I just everybody wants to do this. Hey, I'm happy however it comes. Yes, I know you're just happy. Having oceans of time to write it. Because the only spy.
제가 같이
Yeah, I have to communicate to you that she gave me the money for 2 years. I tried Bowser, yeah, just made mine. No, they just need to taste actually.